Jeff, and I have a new person here with me. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, so my name's Nick. I am on a couple like the Discord server and YouTube commenter as Freewheelian. I just didn't want to use my own name. I don't know why. Just kind of a fun internet thing. And yeah, I the reason I'm having the conversation is because it's so difficult when I'm talking with friends or whoever. It's like, yeah, so I was listening to this Reformed guy in Sacramento, or in who first started, came to prominence on YouTube by making a video about a Canadian psychologist who may or may not believe in God. And so I'm having this conversation just for some human contact from someone who might know some of what I'm talking about.
The
Yeah,
discussions are so esoteric that you just can't go up and talk to a quote unquote normal person and then not look at you like you have two heads.
it's very niche. Yeah, yeah. So, but yeah, I mean, the whole way I kind of got there, I still don't know how to interact with Discord. It's the virtual world I have a hard enough time in reality, let alone virtual reality. So, but figuring it out, and I want to reach out and have the conversation. But I kind of got here by, so was raised sort of Pentecostal. Pentecost. There's like a Venn diagram. It's like, there's Pentecostalism, fundamentalism, a lot of crossover there, and obviously conservatism. So there would be a lot of coinciding spaces in that Venn diagram between those three. But yeah, I grew up going there with my mom and some of my other family members, and just really wasn't doing it for me. It wasn't, not to sound too evangelical here, but it wasn't sort of hitting I had some sort of gap that wasn't being filled by what I was being told. And so I went and searched for it in the world, as we say in the Christian world.
Mm-hmm.
And then when I sort of ran out there, realized sort of just doing what I wanted to do was going to be mostly futility. I ran back to everything I knew that was Christianity. So I didn't really think too much about it. It was more of just like, I'm going to run back into what I know is true. So I did. I became the hardcore person who's up front, raising their hands, which wasn't all bad. I mean, it was a part of my journey, and I even went to like the sort of revival schools that are popping up now.
Mm-hmm.
And then I went to a conservative university after going through a couple of discipleship revival schools. And it was there that, believe it or not, at a conservative university is where I really started to open up my mind and be exposed to thoughts such as, what do you guys think about evolution? Because for me, for years, it was the thought of being made in the image of God was directly tied to either young earth or old earth creationism. And you cannot have one without the other. So as soon as the creationism is torn down, deconstructed, so is the fact that you're made in the image of God. So things like this were good, but it caused this. It's like I couldn't have a crisis of faith before I really became committed to Christ. So it's like I had to become committed to Christ, and then I had a crisis of faith. And so it was in that crisis of faith that I had a nighttime job during school as a janitor, and I can just listen to things for hours and hours and hours. And so at first I listened to like a lot of Ben Shapiro type stuff, but that quickly didn't do it for me because it's just kind of like a broken record. And then I was listening to Dave Rubin, and he had Jordan Peterson on. And that was where I first came across, and I was listening. I was like, man, this is really intriguing. This guy's really upset about the pronoun thing. And, I kind of get it. But then at the end, he's talking about Pinocchio and looking at a star. And my first thought, I'm like, is this guy a Christian? Like, this is like this is a theological discussion he's having with Dave Rubin, like a political commentator. And he's getting emotional, and it's like, I'm feeling something, like it's striking a nerve. There's like a purity and honesty there that it's hard to portray when you explain it to someone, but just where I was at, and that he's ending this tirade on political correctness and pronouns with, you need to look to the stars. You need to wish upon a star. I'm like, what is going on? I didn't know what I was attracted to, but I was attracted to something.
Mm-hmm.
And because of the nature of my job, I listen to everything he has, every interview, every class, every YouTube lecture. I ate it all up. And I feel like what Peterson sort of did for me is he guided me through my faith crisis in a way. So instead of the top down, what I had of you need to believe all this stuff, like you start up here, like you need to believe these tenets, and then we get down into practice.
Mm-hmm.
Peterson's very bottom up. So he doesn't start with certain beliefs. He just starts with, what do I know is true? And so I feel like, even though I'm not sure where he falls, he guided me through, oh, there's something here, even if it's not tied to the fundamentalism that I'm afraid to let go of. Because it's like I was afraid to doubt. I was afraid to think for myself, because as soon as I do, if you're in the evangelical world, like I grew up going to a youth group, and every Wednesday, pastor would give us a little message of like, hey, if you get in a car crash tonight, you know where you'll go, which I find not very, anyway, we'll leave that for later, but I'm not sure that's a good way to go about it. And also I think there's just some holes in his theology and the way he lays out the world. But anyway, so it's like Peterson allowed me to think and to believe that there was something still there, even if I doubted. I'm not sure if I'm making sense, but anyway, then I came across Paul, who was even more of a bridge. More of a bridge for me. And because Paul's able to interact with all this stuff and still believe what he believes. And I definitely don't agree with everything, but yeah, I really enjoy hearing what he has to say, and enjoying hearing someone who shares my faith is able to wrestle with these sort of existential questions of our time, while still, so I think that's basically why I'm here.
You said you did have your crisis of faith. What did that look like? Or
I think it has something to do with control. I think faith is just as much, if not more, letting go of things than grabbing onto things. And so for me, with my sort of fundamentalist background, it's like I had to hold on to these things or else. And not necessarily because I had bad parents or anything like that. I had great parents. It was just what got into my brain of, man, I need to make sure I'm good with God before I die so I can go to heaven. It's like that's the main thing. And so I think what I allowed myself to do is, okay, sort of what Paul's been talking about, of God's outside of the system. Of if he is what he says he is, I can doubt. Like, it's okay to go through this. So I think it was more of just allowing, which I'm still in to some degree. I mean, it's a lifelong journey. But yeah, it was something like that of letting go of this control I had. It's like, if I have these beliefs, I have security. I believe in something as simple. This is a small example, but something as simple as long as I believe in creationism, I can believe I am made in the image of God. Like, I have some sort of dignity as a creature. And I'm not saying I've completely thrown that away, but it's more of like, oh, that's not as big of a deal to me how it happened. I just believe that it did happen somehow, that I am made in the image of God, and humans are. But for whatever reason, it was so tied to a fundamentalist viewpoint. So that's just a small example of sort of some things that I let go of. It's like, oh, it's not as big of a deal how it happened. I don't have to make sense of it all. I don't have to hyper rationalize everything. Something like that.
Was it that when you were holding on to those things so tightly, there was, if I heard you right, there was you said you could still feel some kind of gap there, or that something was missing as you were in the midst of holding on to things like that so tightly. And so that's kind of what was maybe propelling you along to be in a place where Peterson could click for you, and then just looking at things in a different way. Like some people who are holding on to those things so tight, I think are not open to hearing anything else, and they are holding on so tight to those things that maybe they don't feel like letting go, or they don't have any. There are some people who hold on tight like that who don't have crises of faith, right? So
Right.
I guess what I'm asking is, was there anything that was like an impetus? Was it just that gap that you were feeling that was an impetus to want to move to something else? Like it wasn't enough, or was there
Oh
something?
yeah. So without going into too many details, it just wasn't doing it for me. There are certain struggles that I've had, and not necessarily like, oh, I've been watching porn or anything like that, but more of like the depression, anxiety type sphere. And the reason I don't want to give that too much of a label or use it too much is because I don't think it. I mean, obviously it's a chemical imbalance, and obviously people struggle with it, and there's a place for medication. But so much of it for me is a spiritual crisis.
Mm.
It's a manifestation of that. And I've even heard Peterson talk about that. Peterson's someone who clinically not prescribes, but who has been diagnosed himself and takes medication, says, he just straight up says, oh yeah, society-wide depression, it's a spiritual problem. He says he says it's a theological problem. And so that's the reason I don't harp too much on it. But yeah, I mean, there's just certain day-to-day struggles I had, and it's like, yo, this just isn't doing it for me. Like, I've tried the whole super passionate Christian game. It's not doing it. And so I think the reason Peterson was so such a draw for me is he was courageous enough to be honest with himself. Like he that's one of the things I admire about him. To this, I don't listen to him near as much anymore. I'm kind of with Paul, and the fact it did get a little decadent. Like, I went to one of his book tour talks, and I was like, well, this is disappointing. It felt like a political rally or something. It was anyway. It just wasn't what I thought it'd be. Paul describes it best. But yeah, it was, man, this guy's courageous enough to be honest, and he was I feel like he's one of the most honest people I've ever come across, and it's inspiring. It's courageous because he's, tell the truth. So I think he just inspired me to look in and just be honest with what I actually believed, which is, even when I was in my crisis of faith, I never said, well, this isn't true. Certain tenets, the resurrection, for instance, it was more of like, I don't know if it's true. It was the first time I allowed myself to say that. I don't know if it's true. And I had very specific moments where I was like, okay, I genuinely believe this is true now. Not because I know, not because I'm holding on to it. It's like, we're pretending it has completely fixed everything. It's like, no, I can honestly say, due to X, Y, and Z, this is what I'm holding on to. This is what I believe. So super thankful for going through that in a way.
I had a similar experience because I did go to the Peterson book tour when it came through town here, where David Rubin opened up. And, I like watching and listening to David Rubin from time to time. And I know that he, tried stand-up comedy for a little while. I don't think that that's his strong suit. Yeah. And so him opening for Peterson, I mean, I guess it was okay. But then, yeah, whenever Peterson came out and talked, I don't know exactly what I was expecting, but I took someone with me who, I don't know, it just wasn't what I had hoped, right? I was hoping that perhaps he would say some things that represented some of the qualities that I found, most salient or most helpful in so much of his material. And it just seemed to miss the mark that night. I don't know, maybe it was just that night. But coming away from it, the person that I went with that's a little more on the political spectrum, let's say a little center left, just focused in on a couple of things that he said that they just took issue with. And I was just like, I really wish that this hadn't have happened, but yeah. I don't know. I don't know what else I don't know what else I should have expected. I know Peterson, and I see some of the territory that he goes into and how he can be very triggering to certain types of people. And, the things that I'm interested in about Peterson have nothing to do with any of the political points that he touches on.
Yeah.
I've said this before, the things that I find most interesting and that I wish that he would have done instead of his book tour was continued with his biblical lectures, because
Yeah, absolutely.
that hooked me, and those were the things that kept me. And any of his other material or his videos that I looked at or listened to online, when they were focused on those things, it was just mind expanding stuff,
Yeah.
soul expanding stuff. So.
Yeah, I agree. And there's an irony and a paradox with Peterson in that, just as we're talking, I'm thinking about it. One of his biggest critiques that he's obsessed with at times is those bloody neo-Marxist postmodernists.
Postmodernists, yeah.
And part of their whole shtick is deconstruction, right?
Yeah.
And I feel like the irony with Peterson is he at times can get so caught up in deconstructing the deconstructionists that I feel like his calling, if you will, is to construct bottom up something to stand up against deconstruction. And then the paradox with him is at one point, on one hand, I feel like he's able to do that with such things as just the biblical series and digging back into Western culture. And on the other hand, he seems to be overly confident in modernism, which has its own faults. I'm not exactly sure if I have all my facts here right, but yeah. So I personally, I wish he would focus more on sort of the biblical series type stuff, which he seemed to be. I think Paul called it like a natural theology from the bottom up. He was building from the bottom up, which I mean, it was, I didn't think a person who can't even admit what they believe, which I do appreciate. I admire him even saying that at times, as frustrating as it can be. I didn't think I could learn so much from him, but there is even though there's a naivety for people who are more familiar with the Bible, it's like, we knew that, Jordan. We know what BibleHub.com is or whatever. There's something he brings to the table from as an outsider that's just incredible. Yeah.
One of the people who has been on with Paul Vanderklay a couple of times, and he's also on the Discord, but not very frequently. Jess P, not Jeff P, but Jess P, Jess. He talked about, if I remember right, like the whole deconstruction phase, particularly for Christians who go through like a deconstruction.
Yeah.
And he talked about, oh my gosh, I'm blanking on the guy's name. Pete Rollins. Pete Rollins talks about deconstruction, and again, I'm speaking this secondhand through what I remember Jess talking about. But when you go through deconstruction, sometimes you're just kind of left with all the pieces laying out, and then you're kind of wandering around, wondering, okay, well, what do I do now? Now that I'm breaking these things down. And I feel like Peterson is almost someone who shows up there and says, all right, you've got all the pieces. And it's not necessarily that he's putting all of the pieces that you deconstructed back together, but it's almost like he is creating a forum for building something new. So not necessarily, reconstruction keeps coming to mind, but it's something more or something different in kind than that. It's like, maybe construction is the wrong word, but integration. And I know he talks about, from a Jungian perspective, integrating the shadow. So maybe that's the better word, is the integration of these different lenses that we have for viewing reality. I can't quite put my finger on it or put a name on it. We tried to talk about it a little bit in the conversation that Luke and I and Nolan had. But again, I just point back to he's just very helpful in pulling, I guess, just revealing meaning where people couldn't find it before. You know, I talked about how he helps so many people out of nihilism, but he's just good at reminding us, or maybe showing us for the first time, where we never saw it before, that there is meaning out there, and that not only is just the fact that meaning exists something better than nihilism, or something instead of nihilism, but it's something to be excited about, and something to pursue, and something that brings us to life.
Yeah. Yeah. On that note, quick question for you. Did I see correctly that you are a lover of The Last Battle by C.S. Lewis?
I am. There's
Okay.
a portion in that book that holds a really special place for me, but yeah.
Okay, well, if you wouldn't mind, because a portion of that book was part of my reconstruction, if you will.
Oh, okay.
It made sense of something for me. It clicked something for me that made me go, oh, okay, this isn't all vanity. So you know, the scene I'm talking about is it's at the end when the battle is lost to some degree, right? Before all things have been, spoiler alert for everyone out there, before
Right.
before the old has passed away and the new has come, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
Where Aslan is starting to reveal, even though everything that is past, everything that was Narnia, and even to some extent the earth, is going away, I've saved all these things. I've saved your uncle's house. I've saved... Anyway, I can't articulate how Lewis says that. I'd be better just to read the chapter. But the way he put that forward was because, just from my stream of the church, we seem to be unable to understand. This is a whole frustration I have with the whole Pentecostal stream, which I'm still kind of on the borderline of. Is just they seem to be unable to grasp, just as what Paul would say, the age of decay. Like, hey, we're all going to the grave. Any business you start, any nation of this world, any family line, it's all going to pass away with time. Like, the nations of the world that existed 2,000 years ago no longer exist today. Like, they were swallowed up by something else. The great families of thousands of years ago, how many are alive today? You know, how many exist today? And so there is a certain nihilism that can come with that, just the decadence of our world. But what Christianity offers, and what Lewis, I feel like, puts into somewhat of a narrative fictional form in The Last Battle is, oh yeah, it's all passing away, but somehow everything meaningful lasts forever. So that was a huge, when I came across that, because I actually read those books as I was going through college, not when I was younger, believe it or not. And they were very instrumental for me. So when that clicked for me, it was like, and obviously all these New Testament and things I've heard in church clicked of like, oh yeah, that's that. When that clicked for me, it was like, it doesn't matter if what I do lasts in this world or not. If as Paul would say, if he goes and ministers to a homeless guy and that homeless guy dies the next day without quote unquote getting saved or whatever, that doesn't make it vanity. That doesn't make it meaningless. In fact, it's an opportunity to trust even more that somehow these things last into eternity, they echo into eternity. So anyway, I didn't know what section of the book stood out to you.
So I don't think I had the language of deconstruction 15 years ago, because that's whenever I was going through several different... chaos was touching on several different fronts, and my whole, world was shifting. And I had never read The Last Battle, even as an adult. Like, I hadn't read the entire Chronicles of Narnia all the way through. I was introduced to them, in elementary school. think I may have read Prince Caspian and The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, and that was about it. I never enjoyed reading whenever I was a kid, so I don't think I read one book that was ever assigned to me in any high school.
Wow.
All the way up through high school. Never read the book, just figured out a way to get past the exams or the tests or whatever I had to do.
Yeah.
My dad would always say, to me and my brother, if you guys would just apply yourselves, you guys could do great things.
Yeah.
I'm just not interested in it.
Anyway,
Anyway,
that's right.
so I hated reading. But eventually at some point, whenever, 15 years ago, whenever I was struggling with different things and I was reading whatever I could get my hands on, I read a book by Brian McLaren, who at the time was part of the emergent church movement, which eventually, I don't know all the different things that splintered off into, but Brian McLaren, I think, has now moved into like a progressive evangelical type land, or Christian progressivism. But at the time, he had a book called A New Kind of Christian. And that book was, with what it had to say, it was challenging. It helped me with certain things. It made me really angry with some of the other things that he was saying in there. It was poking at a lot of my axioms, to use a Petersonianism, and to, that's some of Job's language too. He talks about getting poked in his axioms sometimes.
Okay.
But he referenced, I can't remember which chapter it was in or what specifically he was talking about, but he referenced a scene from the last battle. And it's where the character Emeth, who's one of the Calormene, I can't remember who the bad guys were in that book, but one of the other kingdoms outside.
The guys who worshipped Tash or something like that.
Yeah,
right?
worship Tash. And I talked about this in the last one-on-one conversation that I had with Paul. I actually read him a blog post that I had made during that time about it. But essentially, it's that scene where Aslan, the Christ figure, welcomes Emeth, however you say that character's name, into the afterlife, into Aslan's country, into heaven.
Yeah.
And it was just a fascinating picture that Lewis painted about, and Lewis in Mere Christianity, when talking about who's going to be in heaven, he said there will be surprises.
Yeah.
And so there's a theme that he touched on there that was just very, I don't know, it was just very moving to me and tapped into meaning for me. And, Luke talks a lot about, things are most real, at least from his perspective, whenever people start crying. They're getting very close to reality whenever they're overcome with tears.
Yep.
And that's what happened to me whenever I started reading about that passage. Because hell, as it was presented to me, and who goes to heaven as it was presented to me in the conservative, Baptist and Pentecostal, or mainly the types of churches that I grew up in, how it was presented to me as, unless you follow this particular line of how you're saved, and the Roman road, the believe and confess with your tongue and everything like that, to see someone like Lewis, who the same conservative evangelicals that I grew up with held in such high regard, to see him put that particular story in a book, and a children's book of all things, to paint this picture that, there are some people in heaven who in the Christian frame, Christ honors and welcomes into heaven, even though they didn't know that they belonged to him, was just a big, it was a very meaningful moment for me. And, I know that there are people who are in that conservative evangelical tribe who will say, yeah, that's a place where Lewis kind of got it wrong, but we'll let him go with that. And they say, Jesus is the only way to get to heaven. And I don't disagree with them. I just, the frame of how that works has become more, I suppose, for me, it seems to have to be more expansive than maybe the way that I had understood it in the past.
Yeah.
And it's okay with me. And I'm even I'm even at the point of saying, hey, if I'm wrong about that, and it means that I'm going to hell because I'm wrong about that, I hope that that's not the case. But it's the only one where I can understand and that I can make sense of. And I'm going to be having a conversation tomorrow where I'm talking about eternal conscious torment with Esther and with Tripp. And, we're going to try to work through that and make sense of how something like that could work, with a just and merciful God. I'm not quick to jump in there and say, well, the only way that I can believe in God is one that doesn't, have hell, and that hell doesn't exist and that people don't go there. I don't want people to go to hell, but at the same time, I'm also not in a place where I think that I've got to go and get every single person that I meet to know about Jesus and say that they believe Jesus so that I can know for sure that they're going to heaven instead of hell. Because, what about that person that I meet on the airplane? And if I didn't talk to them about Jesus, does that mean that they're going to go to hell? I don't know. But if I can't have an honest conversation with them where I don't walk away from it feeling like, oh, okay, well, I just did what I'm supposed to do. And, I got them to say that they believe in Jesus. If it wasn't really a connection point for them, and I didn't feel like I was, what's the right way to say this? If I didn't feel like, I hate the word authentic. I'm trying to find something different, but if I didn't feel like I was being truthful in how I was talking to them about it, like if I was having a conversation with them and saying, well, do you know Jesus? Do you accept Jesus? Do you realize that Jesus is the only way to heaven? And if you don't accept him, I don't know what could happen. That might be meaningful and be real coming from a certain type of person. There may be people who can have that conversation and really feel like there's not that gap that you were explaining inside of them. But for me, in having those kind of conversations, I do feel like there is a gap that's not being bridged inside of me. So it doesn't feel like I'm speaking the truth, or at least not lying. I would feel like I'm lying a little bit. And don't hear me say, yeah, I think it's a lie that, Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life, to use a line from scripture. I don't believe that Jesus is not that.
Right.
But I
mean, to some degree, it's like we've been trained so much to believe that he's the way, the truth, and the life, and we have no idea what that means.
Right. And I struggle with narrowing down into saying, well, I know exactly what that means.
That's right.
Is that you have to confess and believe that Jesus Christ is Lord, for him to not say to you at the end of all things, depart from me, I never knew you.
Yeah.
Lewis helped me to at least see another way of looking at it, at least a possibility that it could be something beyond that.
Yeah.
Not that way of framing is not a part of it, but it's not it's not necessarily as, it doesn't necessarily fit into that um, uh, exclusive frame. That's not what I mean either, though. I'm not saying that Christ and Christianity and the claims of Christianity aren't exclusive, because they most certainly are.
Yeah.
It's hard for me to put into words, and so I hope something in what I've said has made some kind of sense.
No, I absolutely follow. To some extent, what you're telling me reminds me of what Paul was talking about. I don't know if you listened to his podcast when he commented on Eric Weinstein stuff.
I have a little bit. I'm a little behind on Paul. I keep trying to catch up.
or even just I was able to listen to Eric Weinstein's stuff. I mean, I'm just because of my work, I'm able to listen to a lot of things.
Yeah.
And Eric Weinstein's critique of our current institutions in our culture is they leave no gaps. It's like, no, person who might have gotten sick through a vaccine, you can't talk because. And so what you're trying to say reminds me of that. It's like, to go full circle here, I was holding so tight to what I believed there could be no gaps. And and again, I feel even guilty like talking like this, because it's like, of course I believe what I believe, but it's not a scientific equation.
Right.
That's just not the type of thing it is. It's more of like a mosaic than a scientific equation. So do I believe, name that creed from the pre-6th century? Yes, of course I believe. I don't fully know what they mean anymore, but I also know they're not supposed to be this all-encompassing system wherein there are no gaps. Wherein, nope, that person who died in a car crash, I don't think they said the prayer before they died. So, they probably didn't make it. Right. First of all, our eschatology is way off. The New Testament's more about a new heaven and a new earth and people falling asleep than just the evangelical, boom, your disembodied soul goes to heaven. I'm not saying there's not a place for that, but anyway, there's all these sorts of thoughts I have. But I don't know if I was able to make you feel heard, but I did follow what you were saying.
Yeah.
What you're saying there with Lewis, because that part stuck out to me too. And ironically enough, that guy Lewis was referencing there did end up becoming a Christian, because he was referencing a Muslim colleague he had at university.
Okay.
And he did actually, after the fact, end up becoming Christian.
Interesting.
Yeah. At least that's what I've heard. I should get that. I'm fairly certain on that. But no, along the lines of what you're saying, it's like there's so many things that we say with Paul's whole thing with God, the God number one, God number two. He's not trying to put it into a box. He's trying to say, hey, Christians, all these things you're saying, you don't know what they mean. and so even though when we come full circle, have you read much of Chesterton?
I've read a little bit. Yeah.
Okay. So he opens up, I believe it's Everlasting Man. And he tells a little story about a boy who left a village to go find the giant. And then he turns back and realizes his village was on the giant the whole time. I do think if we do enough deconstruction and reconstruction and putting meaning back into our words, we'll come full circle to where we can say Jesus is the way, the truth, and life. However, it's become so muddled and the meaning has been so taken out from underneath them. It's like, I'm speaking for myself, I didn't know what I was saying anymore. I just didn't. And so I can relate to some of what you're saying there.
Yeah, that being able to step away from, I remember reading that passage in Chesterton now. The ability to step away and remove yourself from the perspective that you're in, and then shift and look at things from a different perspective, you start to get more of a map of reality and more of a sense of reality. And then you're just like, okay, now I can walk back into that, and I've got so much better reference for where it is that I'm standing now.
That's right.
That's a little bit of what my experience has been like. I watched a part of a Jonathan Pajot video that Dave W. on the Discord posted about how he talks about how science is nested in
religion.
In religion, yes, thank you. And then he talked about how, the actual experience of going up a mountain gives you, the whole landscape opens up and you're able to see things that you couldn't see before. And that's kind of what this whole ride and this whole experience feels like. It's very interesting. I talk about how I didn't have language for it 15 years ago that's when I was doing my deep dives into Lewis, and then Lewis led me on to reading George MacDonald. But then there was like this big lull, almost this big period of time until Peterson came along. Because before Peterson came along, I don't know, I haven't really thought about this, much less talked about it before, but just what it was for Peterson that kind of helped me click. It was almost like this, I'll say, lull again between the insights and the meaning that I was gaining from Lewis up until the point that Peterson showed up. It's almost like there just wasn't really a whole lot going on, spiritually. It's like the gap was there, but it was kind of not. And I don't know, there just wasn't a lot of focus for me, and Peterson kind of helped it to all snap back into place and help me realize how much of a hunger there still was there, and how I was just kind of numb to it, I suppose, and how I just let it be and left it alone. Now, granted, as I'm thinking back on this, there was I've talked about Pastor Mark Foreman before. He's a pastor out in the San Diego area, and he's the father of two of the founding members of the band Switchfoot.
Okay.
And I just started listening to more Switchfoot at some point back in maybe about 10 years ago. And I heard them in a documentary talking about their dad at one point. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. I wonder who their dad is. I don't really know anything about him. I knew that Switchfoot was a quote unquote Christian band, or they had Christian roots. And I've just always had been impressed with John Foreman, the lead singer, and just the way that he conducts himself, and of course the music. But I found his dad, I just started searching around online, and I found a video of his dad giving a sermon or giving some kind of talk. And I just started listening to it. And now I'm thinking back, I did like a full immersion listening to Pastor Mark Foreman's sermons that I found through a link through his church website online. And I just listened to probably a good 6 years of his sermon, with all the driving around that I was doing at the time. So similar to the job that you had, where you can listen. I was doing a ton of commuting, so I just listened to every single sermon. And at the time, coming up in a more conservative tradition, he was one of the most balanced from a theological spectrum standpoint person that I had ever heard at that point. Because I think he came out of like a drug and rock and roll culture whenever he was a teenager. And, he had a salvation experience where someone, asked him if he knew Jesus. And he was a part of the whole Jesus movement out in, I think it was like the 60s, maybe 70s.
Oh, yeah.
I remember, out in California. And so he's a pastor now in, what's the denomination called? I completely forget. It's like a Calvary Chapel type network of churches.
Okay.
And so I think they're a conservative denomination. I think one of the hallmarks of what their pastors do is they preach through the Bible in order.
Okay.
I think I might be getting that completely wrong, but the point of all that is I was thinking this through and wondering, I was just in a lull. I was completely spiritually deaf that whole time, but that's not true, because I did start feeding on all of this, and it helped kind of inch me along further and kind of helping build things back up. Because one of the things that Mark Foreman did and does in the sermons that I listen to is, like, for example, I remember I remember one time he was doing a sermon about Noah's Ark. And one of the things that he would say is, if you're having a hard time with whether or not this actually happened, don't worry about it. That's not the point that I'm trying to get to. If that's a trouble for you, leave it to the side. And I'm just now connecting this as I'm talking about it with, this is exactly what Peterson did when he kicked off his psychological significance of the Bible. He said, the metaphysics, I'm not concerned with talking about that. That's not what I'm getting into right now. And then he goes on to talk about all of these incredibly significant and deep things. It's interesting as I'm talking here, because that's what I'm not saying Mark Foreman is Jordan Peterson. I'm sure he would not want me to say that. I don't even know if he knows who Jordan Peterson is. But it was an interesting thing that I'm now connecting that he did that got my attention and got me hungry for more and more and more. It's not that I had problems with any of the literal interpretations of these things in the Bible happening. That was never really an issue for me. My perspective is, maybe it seems crazy that those things could happen, and it probably is crazy that a lot of those things in the Bible happen. But that's not a hurdle for me to get over. But I did love the fact that he gave permission for that to be an issue with you if it was an issue, and saying, that's not my point. Here's what I'm trying to get you to focus on. And so my love letter to Mark Foreman, you helped me with that.
Yeah.
Even though those weren't issues for me. I love the fact that you were able to not be holding on to things so tightly to say, if you can't believe that these things literally happened, then you've got a lot of work that needs to be done on you. For someone in a position of leadership in a church to be able to say, it's okay if you don't believe those things that I do hold to or I do believe, or maybe there are some things that I don't, but I'm just not going to talk about it because it's irrelevant to the point. Yeah. That is incredibly freeing to people who are sitting there or are coming into a church, especially out of our modernist frame, where essentially this describes reality, the modern way of viewing things. This is reality. To quote Brett Weinstein, this is base reality. I think it's pretty obvious that this is base reality. And so for people who had just been swimming in that water, but also feel that theological problem, that spiritual problem that you talked about with, people who are suffering from depression, being in this water that we swim in, to be able to go into a church and have someone there say, it's okay if you can't believe any of this stuff. I want you to listen to why the stories that we tell and the story that we curate from the Bible is meaningful, and why we believe that it can fill the deepest longings that you have. And that's just really important. I think that was very helpful for me.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think to some degree that's what attracted me to Peterson, not in the exact same way, but he was saying with everything he had, at times on the verge of tears, not literally saying this, but basically saying there's something here. And it's like I needed that affirmation from someone who was outside. I needed that affirmation from someone who did not hold, who wouldn't even think of holding tenets like an evangelical would. But to go back to what you were saying about the part in the last battle that stuck out to you with the guy who wears some tash, and you mentioned how we'll be surprised by various people we see in heaven, the next life. It makes me think of the whole, what we're talking about with meaning and language is there seem to be people who, and this is murky territory, seem to be people who follow the pattern of Christ more than the people who claim to follow his name. And because it's obviously, I believe in the vital importance of the doctrine of the incarnation and the resurrection. However, there is something metaphysical there too. It is a pattern of reality. It's the pattern of reality. And so someone who might follow fundamentally, oh, I believe this and this and this and this, and I'm a follower of Jesus, there might be someone over here who follows the pattern,
Yep.
who just is more honest with themselves to say, I can't say, I don't even know what those things mean. I can't say I believe that.
Yeah.
So that's when I don't know exactly what I'm getting after. It's been something I've been thinking about too, is Christ as pattern. And again, not so much as pattern that it's divorced from incarnation, because that's vital to the Christian faith. But maybe it's something like that, as Christ is the way, the truth, and life. He is the pattern. Like he's the pattern of reality.
Well, it's like what Paul talks about, it works. I think he may have gotten this from Pajot, but it works on all levels, right? The story level works on the personal level, works on the metaphysical level. Everything clicks together, and it works. Everything works together on all levels. And Paul also, I think he talked about, he was talking about psychedelics. And he said, well, yeah, you can take psychedelics and you can go have this experience, but your body's still just sitting there. Your body is completely disengaged. And so what Paul would say, like Christianity and what those beliefs and what that whole system is driving at is, and the resurrection itself is, this is where everything works on all levels: the experiential, the physical, the metaphysical, the story. So anyway, I feel like I've done a lot of talking and we're running short on time. So I just wanted to make sure before we ran out of time that you could say or talk about anything else that you wanted to.
No, I appreciate hearing what you have to say. I didn't have anything in particular I was wanting to hone in on. There's a certain, I'm working on a couple of different projects, just thinking about, writing about. And one of the things is, so I watched a bunch of Nathan Jacobs stuff. After Paul comments on stuff, half the stuff I just go and dive into myself.
Right.
And a lot of his talks on his Becoming Truly Human documentary about beliefs. And one of the things that I don't know exactly how this ties in, but has been a frustration of mine, sort of waking up from my just naive evangelicalism, if you will, not to crap on it too much, because I am still somewhat a part of the tribe. Don't know quite where I'll end, but is I feel like so many of these things that are deeply valuable to me, that are there in the church tradition, such as spirituality and mysticism, and the relationship with God, as we like to say, my lovey-dovey Jesus is. I feel like for a while there, I was throwing the baby out with the bathwater, because we've taken these things that I believe are, if you can follow the analogy, like bedroom material for Christians, in the sense of Christ and his bride. There's certain things that are meant for everyone to see. There's certain things that are meant for just believers to see. There's certain things that are meant for, like, there's levels, if you will. There's levels of privacy and sacredness. And so these things that to me are very private, or should be very sacred and special, and after you lay your life down, such as intimacy with God or relationship with God, whatever sort of language you want to use, it's like they've been so commodified and so cheapened and so prostituted. It's like, hey, man, we need to get people in church. Let's just offer all these things from God. Hey, he has a purpose for you. I don't want to say the wrong thing here, but if you hear what I'm getting at, it would be good if the church preached in a loving way. It's good that you would die to yourself. It is actually good for you. You are in a decaying body, a system. You need a new start. You need to die. And that's so much of what I was looking for in my late teens, when I sort of gave my life back to God, as you will, is I was looking for a place to die. I was looking for a place to give everything. And I felt like all I was really getting was just these sort of cheap little, oh yeah, here's this and this and this. And, people would sort of come and go, get what they wanted from God, and then left, and then get touched in a worship service, and then take off and go do what they want. And I'm just like, are we just gonna, give this stuff away? Is there nothing sacred So I'm not articulating as well as I would like to, and as well as I do at times, but that's something that I've been getting at is, it's like, I feel like so much of what I've held as sacred is being commodified.
Yeah, no, that
Even
makes
dealing with this.
sense. That makes sense. Yeah, yeah. I have known some people who that enrages, particularly some people who are more progressive leaning that came out of conservative denominations. So yeah, and I'm not saying that you're enraged by it, but yeah, I think there's definitely something there. So I'd be interested, if you get a chance to write about it, to read your thoughts on it.
Yeah. Yeah. Try not to get too enraged, because I don't want to get so obsessed with what someone else does wrong that I don't construct something myself.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. I always like we have the obligatory cat appearance. I can't remember the passage in scripture, but I like where Paul talks about how we're to edify or to build up. So even in some of the worst things that we see going on in the behavior of others, I try to remind myself that I want to do something that is constructive in response.
Yeah.
I also like what Paul Vanderklay says about. My first one was Paul the Apostle, but Paul Vanderklay has said something about, do I have problems with the sin that I see in other people? I do, and I also have a problem that something along the lines of, I have a problem that I don't seem to have as big a problem with my own sin as I do with other people's, and that's an issue.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I have to run because I have another call to hop on. But
yeah,
thank you for accepting my invitation that I threw out there quite a long time ago now. For if anybody wanted to talk, to hit me up. But yeah, I'd be happy to do this again sometime when or if you have time for it.
Yeah, sounds good, Joe. Real quick, next George MacDonald recommendation. I just finished probably the most childish of all. I finished the Princess and the Goblin, which I loved. But I'm wondering if you have a next level for me to go to there.
So I have read predominantly MacDonald's non-fiction or not fictional stories. So like his sermons, his unspoken sermons.
Yeah.
So I would recommend those. But if you want a primer for that, Lewis put together a George MacDonald anthology where he just pulled some of his favorite passages from MacDonald and put them all into a combined work. And that's actually how I first got introduced to MacDonald, because I was trying to get my hands on all things that C.S. Lewis had ever written. And when I came across that, I was like, what's this? And I bought it and I started reading it and started learning about MacDonald. But yeah, I've started The Princess and the Goblin, but I've never finished it. So I need to go back and do that. But yeah, I recommend his unspoken sermons.
Yeah. All right. Sounds good. Thanks, Jeff.
All right. Thank you. Are you okay with posting this?
Yeah, I fear that it might be too Christian, but yeah, go for it.
Maybe that's what I'll call it. #2Christian.
Yeah.
All right. Take care.
All right. See ya.